This is a survey. You get to pick which one you think is more important, leadership or management. And if the technology gods are smiling on us, this is going to work beautifully. Wow, who are the two people that said management? Not going to say who you are, right? It's a trick question. It's a trick question because they're both important. I like to remind people that I am in the leadership development business. I'm not in the leader development business. I'm in the leadership development business, and this is why. There's a difference here as well. When do you become a leader? What's it take to be a leader? When others follow you. True. But you become a leader long before then.
Leaders are often appointed by the people.
Leaders are often appointed by the people. I would say that that's true, but even before that, it's just you become a leader when someone says, Mark, you're in charge. Boom, done, leader. Position, title. So leader is a noun. It's a title, it's a position, person, place, or thing. Why did we put you in charge? What did we put you in charge of, and why did we put you in charge? Put you in charge of a team. Why do we have a team? Got things to do that are too hard for any one person to do. So we've got to put together a team to accomplish those tasks. And you, the leader, are there to do what with the team? What was that? Get the task accomplished. We call that accountability. The leader is there to hold the team accountable to get the task accomplished. Plain and simple. Doesn't get any simpler than that. But leadership's something different, and that's why I've got Margaret Thatcher's picture up here. You know, she was a leader long before she became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, but it's her example, what she did to bring that country back to some level of prominence, to help Ronald Reagan end the Cold War. So what's the essence of leadership? How's it different than just being a leader? It's a verb. It can be a noun too. We talk about the leadership of this organization. That's a thing. But leadership is more about action, how you show up, the example you set, as so many of you said. So it's, in that regard, it's a verb. It's about your actions. And it's not about accountability. It's about taking ownership. So what's the difference between accountability and ownership? Yeah, I mean, so accountability, you're there, the leader, in a position with a title to make sure the team gets the job done. That's somebody else holding you to a standard to hold your team to a standard. So accountability is about somebody else's standards. Ownership is about your own standards. So leadership is when you can take that on for yourself, and more importantly, when you get the rest of the team to take ownership. Now we're talking. That's leadership. We want people who are both. We want people with titles to show up and take ownership. Doesn't always happen. If you haven't read this book, it's a great book. Clayton Christensen. A lot of people will tell you it's probably the greatest business book or the most important business book of the last 50 years or so. Basically, he's looking at, what are the key elements of innovation? Well, the key elements are you have to recognize there's two different types of technology. There's those sustaining technologies and there's disruptive technologies. And great management can screw it up. That a lot of the companies that fail, because he looked at case studies of different companies that failed and succeeded, and what he discovered was that companies with great teams, great processes, they failed. They often couldn't get out of their way. They failed in spite of great management. And that a lot of that was driven by their values, their processes, what they were wedded to. And he said, basically, you've got to figure out what's coming next, what those disruptive technologies are, and you've either got to build it on your own or you've got to buy it from somebody else. These other two guys came along later. One's a professor at Harvard, where Clayton Christensen taught. and the other O'Reilly professor at Stanford University. And this book was introduced to me by probably the smartest guy that ever worked for me. He was a company commander for me in Afghanistan, went on to be in a special mission unit with the Army. He now works for SpaceX. He had a PhD in nuclear physics as an infantry captain. Incredibly fit, just like the total package. We were talking one day about my book. He says, I think you'd like this book, because it's kind of along the same lines. It's balancing these things, right? So they've got Clayton Christensen, Innovator's Dilemma, these two different types of technologies. And these guys try to answer that by saying, how do you solve that dilemma? Well, you solve it by doing both these things at the same time. Exploiting what you're good at right now, and those sustaining technologies allow you to incrementally get better at your core competencies, but also exploring what's coming next and figuring out what those disruptive technologies are and how to use them. Now, both these two gentlemen and Clayton Christensen will tell you it's not always about the technology and how you use it. It's about the market as well. Like, did anybody know they needed an iPhone before the thing was invented? Can you live without it today? And so the market's got to be ready. You've got to be ready. And being able to scale that when it happens is part of this. Dilemma. What's a dilemma? Dilemma is when you are faced with a choice. And generally, usually, most of the time, the choices are equally bad. You got to pick one of them. That's a dilemma. It's not like some people, I'll hear people talking all the time about a dilemma they think they're in, and it's really, they're talking about the choice between something good and something bad, or something right and something wrong. And that's not a dilemma, that's actually a false dilemma. It's not a true dilemma if it's not really a choice between two very difficult or bad or hard things. So let's talk about balance. The balance I'm talking about is equilibrium, not equal. Equipoise. And so we have these things that are different, like exploitation and exploration, or the things in my model that I'll talk to you about here in a minute. That's the key thing. Work-life balance. How many times you had that thrown in your face? You got to work on your work-life balance. Well, how many of y'all, I imagine a lot of y'all, work way more than 40 hours a week? Way more. Certainly, as you were building your companies, you spent way more than 40 hours a week at work. Can you get 40 waking hours a week with your family? 60, 70, 80 hours, whatever you're putting in? Heck no. They got to sleep. You got to sleep. So what does that mean? Work-life balance isn't about having equal time at work and at home. It's about making the most of that time at home. That's how you create equilibrium. You figure out what your kids are into. You study it. You learn it. You start playing the same damn video games. I never did with my son, who's back there on the camera. But if knowing what I know now, I would have taken more interest in some of those things. So I think that if I can leave you with one thought today, it's this, right? When confronted with choices, you're going to have some that are either or. You're going to have true dilemmas. But for every other one of them, which is probably the vast majority of them, try to find the both end. Try to find the balance. Try to find the equilibrium. So step 1, know your natural tendencies. Step 2, know what the situation demands of you. Step 3, be the fulcrum. Have the courage to shift and create that equilibrium. So the issue is finding balance. Anybody in here want to raise their hand and go, selfish is good? No, of course not. You wouldn't do that. But there are times when the situation demands of us to at least be interested in our own self-interest, self-preservation, right? Here's the best example I can give you. Flying on an airplane. Before you take off, what's the last thing they do? Safety brief. Right, okay, so you know where I'm going with this, right? Safety brief. They go, oh, here's this seatbelt. Looks like it came out of a '63 Ford Falcon. Most of you ain't old enough to know what that looks like, so I'm going to show you how you connect it, disconnect it. If we go down over water, you got this life vest. Here's how you put it on. Don't inflate it until you get out of the airplane. And then finally, in the unlikely event we lose cabin pressure, this yellow cup will fall out of the ceiling. Then what do they tell you to do? Take your mask off. Yeah, they tell you that now. Take your mask off, right? Thank God we're still not traveling with those things on. Unless it's your choice, which is fine. What do they tell you to do? Put yours on first. Now I ask you, is that a selfish act? Why not? Yeah, I just see you're getting ahead of yourself. Right? You're rationalizing it because there's goodness that comes out of it. But in that moment, it is in fact at least self-interested, if not selfish, that you put your mask on first. And here's why. When they're demonstrating that thing to you and they're still on the ground, nothing's happening. Everything's calm, cool, collected. That yellow cup actually comes out of the ceiling, bad things are happening. There's probably a hole in the airplane someplace. If you didn't fasten your 63 Ford Falcon seatbelt, you might have gone out the hole. You've at least hit your head on the ceiling. And that cup, it ain't just hanging there. It's flying all over the place. People are screaming, losing their minds. Seconds count. Hypoxia. If you don't put your mask on first, you're of no good to anybody, right? So put your mask on first. Cannot apply judgment to any of these things out of context. Situation demands. All right, so the worst leaders I ever worked for. Thankfully, there weren't too many of them, but they shared common characteristics, and it was this. They all pretty much were exclusive in their tendencies. Transmit, didn't listen, really rigid. They make a decision, they'd never change. No matter how much evidence you gave them that we were going down the wrong path, they were brilliant, they knew it, not going to change. Obviously selfish and very controlling. Second worst leaders I ever worked for. Where do you think they showed up? Yeah, exactly, all the way on the other side, right? Just needed more information. Just feed me. Like you're briefing these people all the time. Numbers, data, status, but there's nothing being done with it. So flexible, they're constantly changing their mind. That guy, I had to be the last person in the office and say, hey, boss, this is what we need to do. I'm watching my watch. Okay, the XO just came out. We got 5 minutes till go time. Hey, this is the course of action we need to use. Okay, what Lerario said. Because otherwise, they're just constantly changing their mind. So selfless, they're giving up opportunities. We're going to pass on that. When do your people grow? When do your people develop? When they're being challenged. And so these people, these leaders, thought they were help. We'll let Alpha Company do that. We'll let 3rd Battalion do that. Meanwhile, your people don't get these chances, these opportunities to take on a challenge. And then the command thing, they were so whatever, do whatever you want to do. But hey, boss, I've never done this before. I don't know how. You'll figure it out. Now these guys, I'd probably drink a beer with some of them. They were nice guys. The other ones, mean, bullies, right? So again, how does this reinforce my point? That the extremes are bad? No. My point is that in the first case, the worst leaders I ever worked for, I think they knew what they were doing, but they were bullies, so they didn't want to change. And in the second case, the second worst leaders, I think they were just ignorant. They were just kind of happily going through life, blissfully ignorant, and so they didn't know their natural tendency. They certainly didn't know what the situation demanded of them, and so we had this. When I wrote Leadership in Balance, I used the term inner fat kid and inner skinny kid to describe this phenomenon. And I wish I had. My wife, as smart as she is, beautiful back here, said, you can't do that. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write it in. I'm just going to keep it because that's just the way I talked. And now I realize it's your inner bully or your inner wimp, right? And if you let the inner bully take over, you get a dysfunctional organization because you're a bully. And if you're the inner wimp because you're just trying to be a nice person, your organization becomes dysfunctional because you're up in the air and they're doing whatever they want to do. And so it looks something like this, right? And so that's my model, and I believe in it because I think it's, we all have these natural tendencies. The situation's constantly changing. When we see that disconnect between how we want to show up and what's required of us, we have to be the fulcrum so that balance is restored. I think the 4 essential domains of management are time, material, risk, and change. What about cost? Well, these things affect cost. I define them as if you have a condition of abundance, that's a very deliberate condition for time. You can be as deliberate as you want. On the other hand, if it's scarcity for time, you've got to be very dynamic, very fast. Material. If you have an abundance of material, guess what? People will tend to waste it. In the extreme, that's where they go. They don't care about it so much because you've got so much of it. And where you don't have it, you start wanting things, which is good, which is bad. Again, you can't assign judgment to them out of context because a lot of goodness comes out of wanting, innovations, creativity. When you don't have enough, you figure stuff out. Risk, drive you to being fearful, if there's a lot of it, or to be reckless. And then change is volatility and fossilization, right? If you got a lot of change, it's just so volatile, your head's spinning, and if there's no change at all, you become a dinosaur, and dinosaurs become fossils. Where's the balance come into play? The balance comes into play that the manager needs to be able to work through these 4 domains, keep the team from gravitating towards the extreme, and prepare the team for the opposite condition. You got abundance now? Guess what? Scarcity's coming. What were we doing, right? 20 to 21, we were at war in Iraq and Afghanistan for most of that time, fighting an insurgency, fighting people who were getting inside our decision-making processes. Disruptive technologies. Disruptive technologies do not have to be like this leading-edge thing. It's somebody doing something different that no one else has ever done before, or in a way that makes it hard for us to react to. I think we were asking the wrong questions, so we were coming up with the wrong answers. We were looking at it as a problem of getting blown up when we should have looked at it as a problem of maneuver and mobility. My last thing I did in the Army on active duty, I worked most of the year 2005 in Iraq. I was the Special Operations Task Force liaison to this 3-letter agency, and the chief of station there in Baghdad used to call these things roadside bombs. Why aren't we calling them roadside bombs? I'm like, you think you're intelligent? That's because they're IEDs. What do you mean, why are we calling them roadside bombs? We should have been calling them roadside bombs. Because then maybe we would have gotten in our heads that, yeah, it's a mobility problem, get the hell off the road, because that's where the bombs are. But our resources, the fact that we could come up with these MRAP things, our processes, which were usually pretty slow and laborious, were sped up during that time of the war, and our values were very much, we want to protect all our people. And so we played defense. We didn't play offense and defense. You got to do them both. We looked at the problem wrong. We were looking at it as an either-or question. Do I get blown up or do I not get blown up? Do the people inside the vehicle live or do they die? Like, can you play offense and defense at the same time? So you solve the dilemma problem by finding balance. Whether it's sustaining technologies and disruptive technologies, it's both end. Exploit and explore, both end. Management and leadership, both end. Here's what I want to leave you with. If you want to win, if you want to succeed, if you want to be a good leader, you've got to both manage and lead. So that question about which is more important, the 2 people that said management, understand that that's probably the harder thing for most of us. Numbers and process, the stuff. Like, that's not my thing. So I always was lucky that if I could, I'd bring in somebody who was good at that stuff. I could focus on more of the leadership thing, you focus on the management thing. Let's be a team together, right? So manage and lead. If you can't do them both yourself, find somebody who's really good at the one you're not really good at. Make them your partner. Innovation's a key piece of it. You got to innovate while you're doing all this stuff if you're going to win. Be the fulcrum. At this point, I have a hard time figuring out if I did a great job or a poor job when no one's asking any questions. I either explained it so clear, you guys know it, you're going to go off and start teaching this yourself, or it's like, what the hell was he talking about? Be the fulcrum. What the hell's a fulcrum?